You're good to go.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rich Berliner from Connected Virtual Tech Event. And I just want to say from the heart that I do a lot of these interviews and a lot of discussions and panels, etc. But I am extremely excited for our discussion today. My guest is Mark Louison, who's Executive VP at Samsung. And Mark and I have a really interesting story together, and it's been a long story, longer than I hate to admit. But I am really honored that I was able to get Mark to sit for this discussion today. And I really just wanted to catch up with him on a number of topics and also talk about the in-building space, which I know is really important to Samsung. And Samsung has just done an incredible job of late, but in-building is a big deal for them. And I wanted to make sure that we discuss that too. So Mark, thank you again. Welcome. It's great having you here. So I guess it's worth telling our story that we met, like, I think if my calculation is right, it's like 37 or 38 years ago.
That's right.
And I was kind of the junior marketing guy at a company in Jersey called Drive Phone. And you were the representative from Panasonic selling phones. And this is the prehistoric days of wireless, if you will. And I remember you coming in and chatting with us about that, and just had a great attitude. We're very, follow through oriented. So kind of tell us, sort of how you developed even before that. What happened that got you to that, that Panasonic wonderful position that's moved your career along to here?
Hey, wow, Rich. So it's so great to have this chance to catch up with you. I guess it's a sign of the busy times we all live in that I can catch up with an old friend in this sort of a format and have thousands of people watching us do that. So yeah, excited to be here, and I really appreciate the work that you and your team do in our industry. It's a very important thing to get the information out there, get the facts out there, tell the story straight, and information is what sets us free. It's what we need, and so really appreciate what you guys are.
Thank you for saying that. That's very kind. So I guess when we were prepping for this, you mentioned that first you had graduated from college, and then you had built a house. So you kind of weren't on a firm footing until you had your own house. So you built your own house,
yeah,
took a year, and then you took this job. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, so I got out of college in the early '80s, and it was actually a fairly difficult time in the financial world. And I remember, so at the school I went to, Malcolm Forbes was the graduation speaker, and the whole commencement speech was about, hey, you just got to make your own path. You can't you got to follow your path. And right, so as you said, got out of school, built this house up in Green Township, New Jersey, lived the American dream, got off to a great start with that, but then started thinking how I was gonna pursue a career path. And there were a couple of sort of obvious things I could do, but at the same time, there was this new thing coming, which was called cellular telephones, right? It's funny, I'm like a gadget guy. I was the kid building the AM radio kit, right? When I was a little kid.
Did you have your Heath kit? Did you have a Heath kit?
Yeah, the Heath kit stuff, the Heath kit stuff, and all that. And so I was pretty attracted. And I remember my father saying, phones that go in people's cars? Are you kidding me? Mark, does this company have a pension? What is this all about? But I mean, to me, it was interesting. In the industry too, people didn't really know where cellular technology was going to go. If you remember, the old AT&T long distance company, they were given a nationwide wireless license by the government. And they did an analysis, and it said that at the peak of maturity of the market, there'd be 900,000 cellular
I
subscribers.
remember that.
Yeah. And so they gave the license back.
Yeah.
And so that's actually one of the things that created this sort of duopoly at the time with the non-wire lines and Cellular One and all that.
Yeah.
So got into it before 1G, and that's where I met you. And
yeah.
here we are.
So now we were burning NAMs to light those phones up, and we were buying Panasonic phones like crazy. I mean, I wish it was here. I have a bag phone, an old Panasonic bag phone, that the guy I was working for, I think was he at night he would go home. He had one of those TRS-80 computers, and he would go home and he would tap on that thing all night. But I think he was buying all the parts from you and then buying the bags separately, and then we were stuffing the bags to make the bag phones.
The Panasonic EB6103.
Right. Exactly.
That was the model number.
Yeah, and I know I still have mine. That's a major flaw today. I wish I had it here. But but anyway, the point being that humble beginnings on all sides on this. And so from that standpoint, what was your thought process on, I can't sell these things forever, that, every 5 minutes, the generation is changing. I got, people, that have transceivers that are bad. I need handsets. It was just kind of a logistical obstacle, I guess, to selling phones back in those days. How did you see the marketplace unfolding for you?
It was a heady time, right? I mean, this industry was really growing fast. It was changing all the time. Really, the only mistake you could make was not taking action, right? And so if you were willing to take action, and in my case, I think I wasn't smart enough to not know any better, so I would just take action. And so one thing led to another in the career. I went from Panasonic, and I ended up at Bell Atlantic Mobile Systems, which, as you know, is the sort of the core company that became Verizon Wireless, and worked there for a while. Went out to Seattle and worked in a software company, did telecom software, which then had me over in Japan. So my family and I lived in Tokyo for a number of years, worked for NTT Docomo there, and also the Bank of America doing telecom investing. Came back to the US and started working for Nokia Networks back in the days when it was still just Nokia Networks. And over time, that was running the old AT&T wireless account. And went from that to running Nokia Siemens networks in North America, and then being the president of all of Nokia's businesses in North America. And I've been now at Samsung, I guess, 7 years, something like that.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's been a great 39 years, I guess, now.
Yeah, something like that. So I'd forgotten this, but you were a member of the executive committee of CTIA.
Right.
And I guess that must have escaped me, but those trade shows and what CTIA was doing back in the football guy, Steve, what's his name?
Steve Largent.
Steve Largent.
Right.
What the CTIA was doing in those days was remarkable. And so how long did you spend on the CTIA board?
I had a long history with CTIA. In fact, again, sort of going back to the very beginning, I was at the very first CTIA show. That was probably more than 30 years ago.
Are you talking about the one in Queens at the World's Fair?
Well, so it was, no, I'm talking about the one that was in Crystal City, Virginia there. Right.
I think that was number 2.
DC. Oh, you think that was number 2? Maybe my memory's going wrong.
No, because I think the first one, I remember going with Mike Pfeffer.
Are you sure,
to
Mike?
The first, what was, I guess, it might have been WIA or something, but
right.
It was at the World's Fair in Queens. And we went, and it was like, I don't know, 20 guys, 30 guys in a room showing phones and stuff. And that's my first memory of one of the shows. And I don't know who the sponsor of that was, but
Yeah. The one in DC that I remember, it occupied half of the ballroom. That was the entire thing with all the exhibits, and there were 300 people there. And and then you look at over the years that evolved to a trade association comprised of all the major wireless companies. And the trade shows are things that attract 30, 40, 50,000 people. So it was great to be on that executive committee and help steer that. CTIA does a lot of really important work for advocating for the wireless industry. So it was a great experience.
Interesting. And how long was that? About, what did you say, 7 or 8 years?
Oh, yeah, something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I admire that, because that's a real give back to the industry kind of thing, and certainly it's your style.
But hey, Rich, isn't that in everything in life, right? If you just go help people, help your colleagues, help your industry, and never expect anything in return, and you'll get way back. Get way more back in the end than you ever expected.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, and I think you're sort of. I was just reading one of the things that I looked up on you, that you were also an honoree of one of the most powerful people in telecom awards, which I think says a lot, Mark.
Yeah, well, surprise, huh? Yeah, last year had that nomination. The thing about that, though, to me, well, that wasn't about me. That Samsung Networks in the world and in North America has been on a phenomenal growth path, and I viewed it. It was a little bit. I didn't personally feel so comfortable with it, but I viewed it as what a great endorsement of what the team is doing.
Yeah,
so quite an honor.
Speaking of the team, I have to sort of make a right turn here, but you've got a tremendous team that you've built. Obviously, many of the guys I've worked alongside, they've worked for me, I've worked for them. You've really built a terrific team, and it's not, just 8 guys in a room somewhere. You've got a huge amount of people here, and, they do a phenomenal job. So how were you able to build that team? Is it sort of a team in your image, or is it a team of people completely different than you? How did you view it?
So I had the luxury here because we've been building this organization over the last 7 years to really be able to bring in some of what I consider to be the finest people in the industry. So nice to have that luxury to build that a bit from scratch, right? And clearly, I think your point. Yeah, I don't think any organization ever. You don't want everybody to be the same, because then you get same think, right? I know it's a popular topic right now about diversity and inclusion. Well, we've been thinking that way at Samsung for a long time. This driving diversity of thought experience is incredibly important. And yeah, this team really has that ability. And if you just sort of look at what's going on in the industry and look at the achievements they're making, I'm honored to be their leader. We're really doing some incredible things.
So did you have to pull the overcoat on kind of tight, early on, and then sort of the middle, before there was any real orders here that you were building something, and yet it was a little chilly because nothing had kind of, happened yet, but you were building this organization, and, if the orders didn't come, there could be some agita there. How did that feel?
Yeah, well, and it's clear in the network infrastructure business, you have to do a lot of investment ahead of revenue. There's no doubt about that, right? There's enormous R&D investments that need to be made. You need to build a support organization. You need to have a leadership team out in front. And so you don't enter into those decisions lightly. But I think the great thing about Samsung is once we decide, we have the technical capability, we have the financial capability, we have an underlying infrastructure that allows us to do that, and not so much be worried about that, right? Just be confident. Certainly not everything happens exactly in the timing you want, and there's other obstacles get put in the way. But I think like pretty much everything. We're just very persistent, got a lot of grit, a lot of determination. And so I don't know that we ever dwelled on worrying about it.
Yeah. Well, you make great products. You don't have to worry about where the chips are coming from. That's another, nice feature. And so I got to tell a really quick little story. This is an interesting one. This goes back about, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years. A guy was on the staff of the Rutgers football coach, called me up one day and said, we need to put a tower in the backyard of the new football coach who just came from Ohio State. We need to put a tower up in his backyard in the middle of $2 million, $3 million houses. It's okay. So with the help of Verizon, one of the things that we did instead, obviously that wasn't going to happen, was put a fiber-fed small cell in for the guy, which solved his problems. And I actually went to his home myself and worked with the installers, and it was a really great thing. And along the way, I took one and bought one for myself to put in my house. It wasn't the industrial version; it was the small version. But I've been extremely happy with that product. But one of the interesting things about the way you're selling is that if I called up the carrier, let's not mention one, but if I called up a carrier and said, I want one of those things, oftentimes they would go, I don't know what you mean. So is it difficult not being able to talk with the customer directly in those situations where you have great products, but it's not, you're sort of behind the scenes on those things?
Yeah, so we do, we build products that we sell to operators, right? And now an emerging part of that are to enterprises. And so we are one step removed from the ultimate person who's using the product. But at the same time, I mean, I think this is part of Samsung's DNA. We're sort of maniacally focused on the customer experience. And so we do get a lot of data about those kinds of products, about any of our products we use, about how they perform and how we improve them. And then, as you said, each operator has a different way of thinking about how they deploy their network. So I'm glad to hear that those issues were solved, because those products are really that we built those exactly for those reasons, and they've served a very important place in that overall sort of big network picture.
Yeah, I have fantastic service at home. And if I didn't have this unit, I certainly wouldn't. So, but I guess you started down a path mentioning enterprise clients. But if you're selling directly to an enterprise client, isn't that an end user directly? Or is that are you defining it differently than I would?
They are of course controlling the network for their particular enterprise. But what I'm still referring to is they're serving their customers, which are the people that work within that enterprise, right? The actual folks who use the technology for some purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I think it's both. It's both.
Gotcha. So one of the things that has fascinated me is that, and I use this term lovingly, you're selling all this pig iron to the carriers. And also you're in the business of the in-building space, which is seemingly, in my world, it's a very, very important part of the landscape at this point in time, because so few buildings really have great coverage. And, whether it's a 911 call or whether it's feeling safe going back to work, that if something happens on your floor, you need to make a call. The importance of your in-building products is incredibly important part of the ecosystem at this point in time. Did you view that as something that we must have this as part of what we do? Or was it, look, we're making base stations anyway, it's not that much different to make in-building gear? Was it, which side of the equation was that?
Good, yeah, good question. So I think maybe to answer this, I need to provide some context. So if you look at our primary business was always building these large, wide area macro radio networks. And ever since back when I visited you that day and your first time I met you in New Jersey, right? That's been the game. You go out and you build as much coverage as you can over as large a geography as you can. So that's always been there. And then when you start thinking about how you go into these indoors or other kinds of venues, that wide area coverage is not going to be sufficient. It just won't, right? Laws of physics, economics, all of that.
Right.
And so if you go back though, a lot of that requirement was kind of solved by Wi-Fi. Right? Wi-Fi had been out there. It's a fairly ubiquitous, well-known thing. And so we had some small level of indoor solutions, right, as you were describing, but it wasn't that big a thing. What's happened over the last few years is that's really kind of changing. And the reason it's changing is that while the latest generation of Wi-Fi is quite good, it's not really robust enough to meet super high-end needs of these evolving enterprises, right? When you go to a cellular-like technology, you're going to get much better sort of throughput, latency, quality of service that the end users are going to demand. And so based on that sort of shift that Wi-Fi is not good enough for many, many customers, we said we need to start investing in and building out our own sort of portfolio of products. Today, they're intended to be sold to the mobile operator who can then work with their distribution channels to deploy them. But as I said, we also have a private enterprise business we're building. And so we've got a lot of products now in this area. We have sort of this family of products called LinkCell, which are lots and lots of different form factors and frequency bands that can be deployed indoors.
Right. So you're doing the millimeter wave stuff for one customer. You're doing, other frequency bands and,
right,
kind of stuff for other customers.
Right. Low band, mid band, and millimeter wave, all of them.
Yeah. Got it. So, it is interesting, and I won't criticize any carrier, but it is interesting that 80% of the voice and data is done indoors. That's one of the, kind of cornerstones of our business. We can all laugh about it. And, we all talk about it at shows and this event. I think it's come up 20 times at this event already. But we build out the network from the outdoors, and we get to the windows of that building and we go, okay, see ya. If you've got e-glass on that building, you got issues. If you've got, sort of any kind of building that's over a certain height, you've got problems. So it seems to me that it's absolutely logical for you to be in that in building space, because again, that's where people are trying to use those Samsung phones that you also make. And it's not remarkable that people want to be able to make calls and do data inside. I just think it's such a natural situation that's part of the ecosystem at this stage.
Yeah, I think it is. So users are demanding it. This providing a higher quality of service, maybe than because Wi-Fi necessarily not good enough. That's another part of it. Some larger users want to have control over their own network for a variety of reasons. So hence you see lots of discussion around private networks. And I think the usage patterns you described, we see something very consistent to that, right? And I would add that not only is it these data sessions are being initiated from inside the building more than 80% of the time, and it represents probably a same sort of proportion of the traffic, that a lot of it is almost stationary usage. At best, what we'd call nomadic, which means somebody's walking around, maybe on a campus or within a building. so you also have that piece as well. The mobile traffic has stayed pretty much consistent. And actually during COVID, things have shifted a little bit as well. You can imagine, right? There's traffic that shifted out of, although it's coming back a bit now, but transportation corridors used to be a higher percent, for example, and now it's more venue based.
Yeah, so I was making phone calls on the way to work, and now I'm working, either closer to home or from home, and I'm not doing that in the morning. So, are there fixed wireless products in the assortment too, that are stationary inside that building?
Yeah, so you mean, so by fixed wireless here, I suppose you're saying that instead of having a wired broadband connection into the building, you have some sort of you use a wireless link to come in to the building.
No, what I mean is more of the in that space. There's a unit in that office, or there are a number of units in there, but they're sort of looking at this as a fixed wireless. It's not to be moved. It's not necessarily, bringing signal in from the outside. It's a fixed situation. Maybe again, that's a subtlety that doesn't exist. But I've heard anecdotally of people talking about, fixed wireless for in building. And I'm not sure what the definition of that might be, but you got
Sure.
to
Well, so I guess we would think of fixed wireless as being that you use from an external source, like an external radio source, you're transmitting a signal into a building, a broadband signal into a building, which goes to a receiver, which then can distribute broadband service within the building. It could connect to the internal wiring. It could use Wi-Fi. You may also use cellular technologies within the building. But to me, that fixed wireless link, and the reason I think that has become more and more popular, well, first of all, the technology, the computing power and the cost of the computing power to be able to provide that kind of a wireless connection has come down significantly. So it's much more reasonable. The second thing is that a lot of buildings only have one choice in terms of who's providing their wired broadband service. And there may be obstacles to providing others there. So by using this kind of fixed wireless connection, you can bypass all the time, expense, the physical labor of doing that, and other obstacles, and get similar quality kind of broadband connection.
Yeah. So yesterday we did the opening panel on what we called 5G, 6G, and the evolution of what's going on there. I don't want to put you on the spot in any way, but it's just not, it's something that's being discussed in the industry fairly widely at this point. And Huawei is saying we're probably going to need a 5.5G step. And there was a deal with Canada, with Japan, that the government made for 6G innovation, and there was something done today that I read in the news about money being given out as grants for 6G experimentation. Apple has been hiring 6G engineers. What is your take on that? And be a futurist a little bit for us if you can. What's your take on that whole scenario?
Sure. But actually, I think my take on that would be to be a historian as opposed to a futurist. So let's think about this.
Let's start back with Panasonic.
But let's go back. Let's go back to then, not dwell on it, but let's go back to then and say basically that was 1G.
Yeah.
Right. So here we sit. So you had the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 20 teens, and now we're in the 2021. And there we are, 5G, right? It's about a decade. Each of those Gs has been about a decade. Back in 1G, they actually spent about 25 years doing the research in Bell Labs to prepare for 1G, right? Yep. Now, if you look at 5G, we started work on 5G 8 to 10 years ago. And it's really only in it's the first inning of a 9-inning ball game, right? So I think what that means is it's early days of 5G. This is going to be around for a long time. By the way, 4G also has a very long tail here.
Right.
Yes, people need to start investing in the early R&D for 6G. We're doing the same. We have a massive R&D machine, and we're always looking at what those new generations are going to be, because that's predicting how the technologies evolve is how you maintain and gain market share, right?
Right.
So we'll naturally do that. But I think maybe for us right now, this is a 5G game.
Got it. So you remember the old New York Coliseum before they built Jacob Javits, correct?
Sure.
So I remember going down, this is right around our meeting days, with 2 Panasonic phones and two fax machines and two Panasonic phones, trying to literally send a fax from one fax machine to the other to show people that technology could actually work someday, that you could actually send faxes across the wireless network. And so I remember, my shoulders almost coming out of the socket carrying that gear around in New York. But you're right, is looking back at these things, we don't know what we don't know until somebody comes up with it and says, hey, here's Uber. You go, Uber? The hell's Uber? And all of a sudden, Uber is the greatest thing in the world. And I think that's the problem for 5G. I wish that Uber and Lyft for 5G existed, so at least people would look and go, oh, that's what I can do with this. Because it's time for us to have those killer apps. And one of the things that the real estate guys ask a lot is, what's the killer app for me for real estate? What can I do with this? And that is a challenge to, talk them through that.
Yeah. So, I can give you a number of different thoughts about this.
I'd love it.
So we think our job at Samsung, first of all, is to provide the sort of the foundation for the technology that lots and lots of people can innovate on, right? We have a very open approach to that, so that the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Facebooks, the whomever that are out there can build on their ideas to the technology. So first and foremost, you got to build that platform so that people can do as they see fit. Interestingly, one of the things we do in Samsung's, we have advisory committees of youth that tell us what they think, right? Because the younger generations, they're thinking differently, right? And I think your observation about those Ubers lists, there were 4G created trillions of dollars of new market wealth, right? We have the same expectation for 5G, even though potentially we may not know exactly how that is. But let's think about this for a second. Essentially what you're doing, and let's say it's in a building. So first off, there is an immediate problem that this helps solve. Today's wireless connectivity, how many times do you still get the little twirling thing? And, because you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the latency. And part of that is also that 5G, the other sort of leg of the stool, is that it allows thousands of devices in a close proximity to get that same quality of service. So we are still trying to solve this, improve the basic connectivity and allow the capacity for that to happen. So I think that's there. But then you start to let your mind go a little bit from there and think, you're on a factory floor. You now have this connectivity, low latency. You combine that with the fact that you can do thousands of them, and you connect that to some sort of mobile edge computing platform. even 5 years ago, if you wanted to do something like really on the cutting edge of that, you would have had to strap a computer on your back, and you would have had a big fiber optic cable, coming out of that, and you'd be tethered to that. Now, all that computing power, all that connectivity sits somewhere else, and you can really start to do things efficiently. I think that's going to really have things blossom. So we're not so worried about how those things are going to come. There's going to be tons of them. There's I don't know if this is too, again, this is a little bit of history, but there's a fundamental thing that's been happening in the world for the last 60 years. And that is that everything in the world, it was all made out of atoms, right? Atomic particles. And what's been happening for the last 60 years is we've been converting those things to bits of software or bits of data, software driven, right? And so, it started with things like your newspaper or a magazine or a movie or some piece of music. But now that's evolved to almost every physical thing you see in life. I mean, we're looking at a dog fence for our dog, and you don't put one of those wired fences out anymore. You do a virtual geofence with a software connection to the dog's collar, right? I mean, that's a level 4 autonomous vehicle is going to generate over 3 terabits of data an hour, yeah. Right? And so what we're finding is with all of this conversion, I mean, how much of a car is software now, right? With all this conversion from atoms to bits of data, what we're discovering is moving it around adds huge value. Being able to move it around, provide context, adds huge value. That's why the Facebooks, the Googles, the Microsofts, right, the Ubers, the Lyfts, whoever you want, that's how they created the trillions of dollars of value. That trend is absolutely continuing to accelerate. The amount of data being created, the insatiable appetite for that data by different users of it is going to drive huge value in 5G.
Interesting. So it would seem to me that one of the real benefits that Samsung has is the end-to-end piece of this. In other words, I'm making it a phone. So it's not, when the phone, isn't connecting or there's a problem with the antennas in the phones, it's not me, it's him. So then it's the network, and then it's the software, and then it's the chip that it's that end-to-end piece that seems to me to be an incredible value in the ecosystem of all of this, of all the things you've talked about, of going from electrons to bits of data managed by software. So, how do you see it? It seems like you're in the catbird seat in having those things as an advantage from literally end to end. Do you see it the same way?
Absolutely. This is and I think it was one of the personal reasons I was so attracted to Samsung all those years ago, right? From the ability to invest in the R&D, building, having the access and managing silicon the way we do, semiconductors, all the way through the different kinds of devices and gear we build. We build 500 million connected devices a year we sell, right? So that's a huge advantage for us. The question is, what do you do with that advantage? How do you act on that in the market to really create value? And so that's why I think we were talking earlier about consumers and understanding how, and when I say consumer, of course there's retail consumer, but there's also the enterprise customer who's using these products as well. So we maniacally go back to that. How do customers use these products, and how do we provide better experiences, right? So all the other stuff's great, but if you don't activate it that way, it's less useful.
But what's interesting, and I don't say this in a negative way, because I'm a happy Samsung phone user and have been for the duration. But there are certain circles where I will say, oh, you want to connect or you want to do something, and my kid will be standing there who's 11, and they look at me like I've got leprosy because I'm not part of the Apple army. And I find that interesting, but in a way depressing, that it's sort of the cool kids and the people who are serious about their products and what they need to do with it. So I mean, that's not I don't want to put you on the spot on that one, but it's just an interesting part of life, I think, if you're part of either camp, and how that all works. And again, I have no issues with what I've got and what I use, but there is a kind of a piece of the population, and it may be anyone under a certain age, that looks at anything that's not an Apple phone in a bizarre way. I just think that's a credit to how well your equipment has to work in order to climb that hill.
So I appreciate that last comment. I think but we're friends here. Let's just talk straight about this, right? It's a gigantic industry. The industry itself needs lots of players in it, right? Competition's good. Innovation from different players is good. Different companies bring their brand to life in different ways. But actually, I would challenge you to say, and if you really start looking at Samsung's consumer marketing, the products we build in a vast sort of set of whether those are televisions or high definition monitors, or how we partner with others to bring those to life, or all of our appliances and mobile devices and computers and tablets and watches and on and on and on. I think it's really pretty compelling. It's very, and maybe that's my view because I'm an employee, but we have customers who are actually 2 years old and 90 years old, right? So we've got the gamut too. So I like where we sit, and I think it's great that there are other companies out there in this space. It shows that it's an important place to be.
And as you said, the volume is enormous. There's plenty of room for everyone, and so I will add this as a joke. I don't want Alex head to blow off, but the one of the things that's discussed with Apple is making a car. Samsung would be so much better positioned for that, but the bottom line is I think you've got plenty to handle with what you've got already. And so, I think the time for me to go out and buy a Samsung electric vehicle may be in the distant future yet. So hopefully that may come to pass one day, but that would be an interesting twist to this all, wouldn't it?
So we're a very big company, right? We're way over the $200 billion mark in revenue, and we participate in lots of different product areas, and we're constantly looking at where are new growth areas, where are things that complement what we do today. And so, for example, we're one of the world's largest manufacturers, and we have incredible supply chain and manufacturing capability. One of the businesses that Samsung has entered over the last, let's say, decade, are production of biologics for pharmaceuticals, because our manufacturing process, our discipline, our ability to invest ahead of revenue for something like that is significant. And so we view that as an attractive business. So I think there are some really smart people in our company that look at everything and evaluate everything. So, I mean, it's exciting. We see what happens over time.
It's got to be, I know probably haven't been flying all that much, but it must be quite a trip to go to Korea and see what they're working on. It's almost like, James Bond going to see Hugh and what's in the lab.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Actually, it does feel a little bit like that. But I would also relate it to this audience. I would say we made an investment about a year ago. We acquired a professional services firm, Teleworld Solutions. And this is an army of professional engineers. And one of the things they do, one of their big practice areas is designing, implementing, and then supporting the operation of enterprise networks. And they do some of that for the mobile operators, and they do some of that directly with the enterprise. So there's one where we made maybe an investment closer to home in a specific area. And I think it actually is quite relevant for your audience.
Yeah, very much so. And I will add to that, I love Shervin. I think he's the best. So again, that fits in what we talked about with great people. You built a great team, you acquired another great team. So I tip my hat to you, Mark. Thanks so much for doing this. It was great catching up. We have to play golf and see each other soon. I look forward to that. And again, thank you. Be well, and let's talk again soon.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Rich. It was a pleasure.